Chapter 13 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 13. He was standing immediately inside the door at the bottom, though it was so dark she could hardly see him. The villagers were audibly talking just without. "He's sure to come, rather or late," resounded up the spiral in the vocal note of Hezzy Biles. "He wouldn't let such a fine show as the comet makes tonight go by without peeping at it, not Master Cleeve. Did you bring along the flagon, Haymoss? We'll sit down inside his little board house here and wait. He'll come afore bedtime. Why, his spy glass'll stretch out that there comet as long as Welland Lane. I'd as soon miss the great peep show that comes every year to Greenhill Fair as a sight of such an immortal spectacle as this," said Amos Fry. "Immortal spectacle? Where did you get that choice mossel, Haymoss?" inquired Sammy Blore. "Well, well, the Lord save good scholars, and take just a bit of care of them that bain't. As 'tis so dark in the hut, suppose we draw out the bench into the front here, souls." The bench was accordingly brought forth, and in order to have a back to lean against, they placed it exactly across the door into the spiral staircase. "Now, have you got any baccy? If you haven't, I have," continued Sammy Blore. A striking of matches followed, and the speaker concluded comfortably, "Now we shall do very well." "And what do this comet mean?" asked Haymoss. "That some great tumult is going to happen, or that we shall die of a famine?" "Famine? No," said Nat Chapman. "That only touches such as we, and the Lord only concerns himself with born gentlemen. It isn't to be supposed that a strange fiery lantern like that will be lighted up for folks with 10 or a dozen shillings a week, and their gristin, and a load of thorn faggots when we can get 'em. If it's a token that he's getting hot about the ways of anybody in this parish, it's about Lady Constantine's, since she's the only one of a figure worth such a hint. As for her income, that she's lost now. Ah, well, I don't take in all I hear." Lady Constantine drew close to St. Cleeve's side and whispered, trembling, "Do you think they'll wait long, or can we get out?" Swithin felt the awkwardness of the situation. The men had placed the bench close to the door, which, owing to the stairs within, opened outwards, so that at the first push by the pair inside to release themselves, the bench must have gone over and sent the smokers sprawling on their faces. He whispered to her to ascend the column and to wait till he came. "And have the dead man left her nothing, hey? And have he carried his inheritance into his grave, and will his skeleton lie warm on account of it?" "Heh," said Haymoss. "'Tis all swallered up," observed Hezzy Biles. "His goings on made her miserable till he died, and if I were the woman I'd have my randies now. He ought to have bequeathed to her, our young gent, Mr. St. Cleeve, as some sort of amends. I'd up and marry him if I were she, since her downfall has brought 'em quite near together, and made him as good as she in rank as he was afore in bone and breeding." "Do you think she will?" asked Sammy Blore. "Or is she meaning to enter upon a virgin life for the rest of her days? I don't want to be unreverent to her ladyship, but I really don't think she's meaning any such waste of a Christian carcass. I say she's rather meaning to commit flat matrimony with somebody or other, and one young gentleman in particular. But the young man himself? Planned, cut out, and finished for the delight of woman. Yet he must be willing. That would soon come. If they get up this tower ruling plannards together much longer, their plannards will soon rule them together, in my way of thinking. If she've a disposition towards the knot, she can soon teach 'em. True, and lawfully. What before might have been a wrong desire is now a holy wish." The scales fell from Swithin St. Cleeve's eyes as he heard the words of his neighbours. How suddenly the truth dawned upon him, how it bewildered him till he scarcely knew where he was, how he recalled the full force of what he had only half apprehended at earlier times, particularly of that sweet kiss she had impressed on his lips when she supposed him dying. These vivid realizations were difficult to tell in slow verbiage. He could remain there no longer, and with an electrified heart he retreated up the spiral. He found Lady Constantine halfway to the top, standing by a loophole, and when she spoke he discovered that she was almost in tears. "Are they gone?" she asked. "I fear they will not go yet," he replied, with a nervous fluctuation of manner that had never before appeared in his bearing towards her. "What shall I do?" she asked.
I ought not to be here. Nobody knows that I am out of the house. Oh, it is a mistake. I must go home somehow."
"Did you hear what they were saying?"
"No," said she. "What is the matter? Surely you are disturbed. What did they say?"
"It would be the exaggeration of frankness in me to tell you."
"Is it what a woman ought not to be made acquainted with?"
"It is in this case. It is so new and so indescribable an idea to me that—" He leant against the concave wall, quite tremulous with strange incipient sentiments.
"What sort of an idea?" she asked, gently.
"It is an awakening. In thinking of the heaven above, I did not perceive the—"
"Earth beneath?"
"The better heaven beneath. Pray, dear Lady Constantine, give me your hand for a moment." She seemed startled, and the hand was not given.
"I am so anxious to get home," she repeated. "I did not mean to stay here more than 5 minutes."
"I fear I am much to blame for this accident," he said. "I ought not to have intruded here. But don't grieve. I will arrange for your escape somehow. Be good enough to follow me down." They redescended, and, whispering to Lady Constantine to remain a few stairs behind, he began to rattle and unlock the door. The men precipitately removed their bench, and Swithin stepped out, the light of the summer night being still enough to enable them to distinguish him. "Well, Hezekiah, Samuel, and Nat, how are you?" he said boldly. "Well, sir, 'tis much as before with me," replied Nat. "1 hour a week with God Almighty, and the rest with the devil, as a chap may say. And really, now your poor father's gone, I'd as lief that Sunday hour should pass like the rest, for Parson Tarkenham do tease a feller's conscience that much, that church is no holiday at all to the limbs, as it was in your reverend father's time. But we've been waiting here, Mr. St. Cleeve, supposing ye had not come." "I have been staying at the top, and fastened the door not to be disturbed. Now, I am sorry to disappoint you, but I have another engagement this evening, so that it will be inconvenient to admit you. Tomorrow evening, or any evening but this, I will show you the comet, and any stars you like." They readily agreed to come the next night, and prepared to depart. But what with the flagon and the pipes, and the final observations, getting away was a matter of time. Meanwhile a cloud, which nobody had noticed, arose from the north overhead, and large drops of rain began to fall so rapidly that the conclave entered the hut till it should be over. St. Cleeve strolled off under the firs. The next moment there was a rustling through the trees at another point, and a man and woman appeared. The woman took shelter under a tree, and the man, bearing wraps and umbrellas, came forward. "My lady's man and maid," said Sammy. "Is her ladyship here?" asked the man. "No. I reckon her ladyship keeps more kissable company," replied Nat Chapman. "Pack of stuff," said Blore. "Not here. Well, to be sure, we can't find her anywhere in the wide house. I've been sent to look for her, with these overclothes and umbrella. I've suffered horseflesh traipsing up and down, and can't find her nowhere. Lord, Lord, where can she be? And 2 months' wages owing to me." "Why so anxious, Anthony Green, as I think your name is shaped? You be not a married man," said Hezzy. "'Tis what they call me, neighbours, whether or no." "But surely you was a bachelor chap by late, afore her ladyship got rid of the regular servants and took ye." "I were, but that's past." "And how come ye to bow your head to it, Anthony? 'Tis what you never was inclined to. You was by no means a doting man in my time." "Well, had I been left to my own free choice, 'tis as like as not I should have shunned forming such kindred, being at that time a poor dayman, or weekly at my highest luck in hiring. But 'tis wearing work to hold out against the custom of the country, and the woman wanting ye to stand by her and save her from the unborn shame. Since common usage would have it, I let myself be carried away by opinion, and took her. Though she's never once thanked me for covering her confusion, that's true. But 'tis the way of the lost when safe, and I don't complain. Here she is, just behind under the tree, if you'd like to see her. A very nice homespun woman to look at too, for all her few weather stains. Well, well, where can my lady be? And I, the trusty general man, 'tis more than my place is worth to lose her. Come forward, Christina, and talk nicely to the work folk." Whilst the woman was talking, the rain increased so much that they all retreated further into the hut. St. Cleeve, who had impatiently stood a little way off, now saw his opportunity, and putting in his head, said, "The rain beats in, and you had better shut the door. I must ascend and close up the dome." Slamming the door upon them without ceremony, he quickly went to Lady Constantine in the column, and telling her they could now pass the villagers unseen, he gave her his arm. Thus he conducted her across the front of the hut into the shadows of the firs. "I will run to the house and harness your little carriage myself," he said tenderly. "I will then take you home in it." "No, please don't leave me alone under these dismal trees." Neither would she hear of his getting her any wraps, and opening her little sunshade to keep the rain out of her face, she walked with him across the insulating field, after which the trees of the park afforded her a sufficient shelter to reach home without much damage. Swithin was too greatly affected by what he had overheard to speak much to her on the way, and protected her as if she had been a shorn lamb. After a farewell which had more meaning than sound in it, he hastened back to Ringshill Spear. The workfolk were still in the hut, and by dint of friendly converse and a sip at the flagon, had so cheered Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Green that they neither thought nor cared what had become of Lady Constantine. St. Cleeve's sudden sense of new relations with that sweet patroness had taken away in 1/2 hour his natural ingenuousness. Henceforth he could act a part. "I have made all secure at the top," he said, putting his head into the hut. "I'm now going home. When the rain stops, lock this door, and bring the key to my house." End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 14. The laboured resistance which Lady Constantine's judgment had offered to her rebellious affection ere she learnt that she was a widow now passed into a bashfulness that rendered her almost as unstable of mood as before. She was one of that metal, fervid, cordial, and spontaneous, who had not the heart to spoil a passion, and her affairs having gone to rack and ruin by no fault of her own, she was left to a painfully narrow existence, which lent even something of rationality to her attachment. Thus it was that her tender and unambitious soul found comfort in her reverses. As for St. Cleeve, the tardiness of his awakening was the natural result of inexperience, combined with devotion to a hobby. But like a spring bud, hard in bursting, the delay was compensated by after-speed. At once breathlessly recognizing in his fellow watcher of the skies a woman who loved him, in addition to the patroness and friend, he truly translated the nearly forgotten kiss she had given him under her moment of despair. Lady Constantine, in being 8 or 9 years his senior, was an object even better calculated to nourish a youth's first passion than a girl of his own age, superiority of experience and ripeness of emotion exercising the same peculiar fascination over him as over other young men in their first ventures in this kind. The alchemy which thus transmuted an abstracted astronomer into an eager lover, and, it must be said, spoilt a promising young physicist to produce a commonplace inamorato, may be almost described as working its change in one short night. Next morning he was so fascinated with the novel sensation that he wanted to rush off at once to Lady Constantine and say, "I love you true," in the intensest tones of his mental condition, to register his assertion in her heart before any of those accidents which creep in twixt vows and change decrees of kings should occur to hinder him. But his embarrassment at standing in a new position towards her would not allow him to present himself at her door in any such hurry. He waited on, as helplessly as a girl, for a chance of encountering her. But though she had tacitly agreed to see him on any reasonable occasion, Lady Constantine did not put herself in his way. She even kept herself out of his way. Now that for the first time she had learnt to feel a strong impatience for their meeting, her shyness for the first time led her to delay it. But given two people living in one parish, who long from the depths of their hearts to be in each other's company, what resolves of modesty, policy, pride, or apprehension will keep them for any length of time apart? One afternoon he was watching the sun from his tower, half echoing the Greek astronomer's wish that he might be set close to that luminary for the wonder of beholding it in all its glory, under the slight penalty of being consumed the next instant. He glanced over the high road between the field and the park, which sublunary features now too often distracted his attention from the telescope, and saw her passing along that way. She was seated in the donkey carriage that had now taken the place of her landau, the white animal looking no larger than a cat at that distance. The buttoned boy, who represented both coachman and footman, walked alongside the animal's head at a solemn pace. The dog stalked at the distance of a yard behind the vehicle, without indulging in a single gambol, and the whole turnout resembled in dignity a dwarfed state procession. Here was an opportunity but for two obstructions: the boy, who might be curious, and the dog, who might bark and attract the attention of any labourers or servant near. Yet the risk was to be run, and knowing that she would soon turn up a certain shady lane at right angles to the road she followed, he ran hastily down the staircase, crossed the barley, which now covered the field, by a path not more than a foot wide that he had trodden for himself, and got into the lane at the other end. By slowly walking along in the direction of the turnpike road, he soon had the satisfaction of seeing her coming. To his surprise, he also had the satisfaction of perceiving that neither the boy nor the dog was in her company. They both blushed as they approached, she from sex, he from inexperience. One thing she seemed to see in a moment, that in the interval of her absence St. Cleeve had become a man, and as he greeted her with this new and maturer light in his eyes, she could not hide her embarrassment or meet their fire. "I have just sent my page across to the column with your book on cometary nuclei," she said softly, "that you might not have to come to the house for it. I did not know I should meet you here." "Didn't you wish me to come to the house for it?" "I did not, frankly. You know why, do you not?" "Yes, I know. Well, my longing is at rest. I have met you again. But are you unwell, that you drive out in this chair?" "No, I walked out this morning, and am a little tired." "I have been looking out for you night and day. Why do you turn your face aside? You used not to be so." Her hand rested on the side of the chair, and he took it. "Do you know that since we last met I have been thinking of you, daring to think of you, as I have never thought of you before?" "Yes, I know it." "How do you know?" "I saw it in your face when you came up." "Well, I suppose I ought not to think of you so, and yet, had I not learned to, I should never fully have felt how gentle and sweet you are. Only think of my loss if I had lived and died without seeing more in you than in astronomy. But I shall never leave off doing so now. When you talk, I shall love your understanding. When you are silent, I shall love your face. But how shall I know that you care to be so much to me?" Her manner was disturbed as she recognized the impending self-surrender, which she knew not how to resist, and was not altogether at ease in welcoming. "O Lady Constantine," he continued, bending over her, "give me some proof more than mere seeming and inference, which are all I have at present, that you don't think this I tell you of presumption in me. I have been unable to do anything since I last saw you, for pondering uncertainly of this. Some proof or little sign that we are in one heart." A blush settled again on her face, and half in effort, half in spontaneity, she put her finger on her cheek. He almost devotionally kissed the spot. "Does that suffice?" she asked, scarcely giving her words voice. "Yes, I am convinced." "Then that must be the end. Let me drive on. The boy will be back again soon." She spoke hastily, and looked askance to hide the heat of her cheek. "No, the tower door is open, and he will go to the top, and waste his time in looking through the telescope." "Then you should rush back, for he will do some damage." "No, he may do what he likes, tinker or spoil the instrument, destroy my papers, anything, so that he will stay there and leave us alone." She glanced up with a species of pained pleasure. "You never used to feel like that," she said, and there was a keen self-reproach in her voice. "You were once so devoted to your science that the thought of an intruder to your temple would have driven you wild. Now you don't care, and who is to blame? Ah, not you, not you." The animal ambled on with her, and he, leaning on the side of the little vehicle, kept her company. "Well, don't let us think of that," he said. "I offer myself and all my energies, frankly and entirely, to you, my dear, dear lady, whose I shall be always. But my words in telling you this will only injure my meaning instead of emphasize it. In expressing even to myself my thoughts of you, I find that I fall into phrases which, as a critic, I should hitherto have heartily despised for all their commonness. What is the use of saying, for instance, as I have just said, that I give myself entirely to you, and shall be yours always, that you have my devotion, my highest homage? Those words have been used so frequently in a flippant manner That honest use of them is not distinguishable from the unreal. He turned to her and added, smiling, "Your eyes are to be my stars for the future." "Yes, I know it, and all you would say. I dreaded even while I hoped for this, my dear young friend," she replied, her eyes being full of tears. "I am injuring you. Who knows that I am not ruining your future? I, who ought to know better. Nothing can come of this. Nothing must, and I am only wasting your time. Why have I drawn you off from a grand celestial study to study poor lonely me? You say you will never despise me, when you get older, for this episode in our lives. But you will, I know you will. All men do, when they have been attracted in their unsuspecting youth as I have attracted you. I ought to have kept my resolve." "What was that?" "To bear anything rather than draw you from your high purpose. To be like the noble citizen of old Greece, who, attending a sacrifice, let himself be burnt to the bone by a coal that jumped into his sleeve, rather than disturb the sacred ceremony. But can I not study and love both? I hope so, I earnestly hope so. But you'll be the first if you do, and I am the responsible one if you do not." "You speak to me as if I were quite a child, and you immensely older. Why, how old do you think I am? I am 20. "You seem younger. Well, that's so much the better. 20 sounds strong and firm. How old do you think I am?" "I have never thought of considering." He innocently turned to scrutinize her face. She winced a little. But the instinct was premature. Time had taken no liberties with her features as yet, nor had trouble very roughly handled her. "I will tell you," she replied, speaking almost with physical pain, yet as if determination should carry her through. "I am 28. Nearly, I mean a little more, a few months more. Am I not a fearful deal older than you?" "At first it seems a great deal," he answered, musing. "But it doesn't seem much when one gets used to it." "Nonsense!" she exclaimed. "It is a good deal." "Very well, then, sweetest Lady Constantine, let it be," he said, gently. "You should not let it be. A polite man would have flatly contradicted me. Oh, I am ashamed of this," she added a moment after, with a subdued, sad look upon the ground. "I am speaking by the card of the outer world, which I have left behind utterly. No such lip service is known in your sphere. I care nothing for those things really, but that which is called the Eve in us will out sometimes. Well, we will forget that now, as we must to a very distant date forget all the rest of this." He walked beside her thoughtfully a while, with his eyes also bent on the ground. "Why must we forget it all?" he inquired. "It is only an interlude." "An interlude? It is no interlude to me. Oh, how can you talk so lightly of this, Lady Constantine? And yet, if I were to go away from here, I might perhaps soon reduce it to an interlude. Yes," he resumed impulsively, "I will go away. Love dies, and it is just as well to strangle it in its birth. It can only die once. I'll go." "No, no," she said, looking up apprehensively. "I misled you. It is no interlude to me. It is tragical. I only meant that from a worldly point of view it is an interlude, which we should try to forget. But the world is not all. You will not go away." But he continued drearily, "Yes, yes, I see it all. You have enlightened me. It will be hurting your prospects even more than mine if I stay. Now Sir Blount is dead, you are free again. You may marry where you will, but for this fancy of ours. I'll leave Welland before harm comes of my staying." "Don't decide to do a thing so rash," she begged, seizing his hand and looking miserable at the effect of her words. "I shall have nobody left in the world to care for, and now I have given you the great telescope and lent you the column, it would be ungrateful to go away. I was wrong. Believe me that I did not mean that it was a mere interlude to me. Oh, if you only knew how very, very far it is from that! It is my doubt of the result to you that makes me speak so slightingly." They were now approaching a crossroads, and casually looking up they beheld 30 or 40 yards beyond the crossing Mr. Torkingham, who was leaning over a gate, his back being towards them. As yet he had not recognized their approach. The master passion had already supplanted St. Cleeve's natural ingenuousness by subtlety. "Would it be well for us to meet Mr. Torkingham just now?" he began. "Certainly not," she said hastily, and pulling the rein she instantly drove down the right-hand road. "I cannot meet anybody," she murmured. "Would it not be better that you leave me now, not for my pleasure, but that there may arise no distressing tales about us before we know how to act in this She smiled faintly at him. A heart-aching extremity. They were passing under a huge oak tree whose limbs, irregular with shoulders, knuckles, and elbows, stretched horizontally over the lane in a manner recalling Absalom's death. A slight rustling was perceptible amid the leafage as they drew out from beneath it, and turning up his eyes, Swithin saw that very buttoned page whose advent they had dreaded, looking down with interest at them from a perch not much higher than a yard above their heads. He had a bunch of oak apples in one hand, plainly the object of his climb, and was furtively watching Lady Constantine with the hope that she might not see him, but that she had already done, though she did not reveal it, and fearing that the latter words of their conversation had been overheard, they spoke not till they had passed the next turning. She stretched out her hand to his. "This must not go on," she said imploringly. "My anxiety as to what may be said of such methods of meeting makes me too unhappy. See what has happened." She could not help smiling. "Out of the frying pan into the fire. After meanly turning to avoid the parson, we have rushed into a worse publicity. It is too humiliating to have to avoid people, and lowers both you and me. The only remedy is not to meet." "Very well," said Swithin with a sigh. "So it shall be." And with smiles that might truly have been tears they parted there and then. End of chapter 14. Chapter 15 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 15. The summer passed away, and autumn, with its infinite suite of tints, came creeping on. Darker grew the evenings, tearfuller the moonlights, and heavier the dews. Meanwhile the comet had waxed to its largest dimensions, so large that not only the nucleus but a portion of the tail had been visible in broad day. It was now on the wane, though every night the equatorial still afforded an opportunity of observing the singular object, which would soon disappear altogether from the heavens for perhaps thousands of years. But the astronomer of Rings Hill Spear was no longer a match for his celestial materials. Scientifically he had become but a dim vapour of himself. The lover had come into him like an armed man, and cast out the student, and his intellectual situation was growing a life and death matter. The resolve of the pair had been so far kept. They had not seen each other in private for 3 months, but on one day in October he ventured to write a note to her. "I can do nothing. I have ceased to study, ceased to observe. The equatorial is useless to me. This affection I have for you absorbs my life, and outweighs my intentions. The power to labour in this grandest of fields has left me. I struggle against the weakness till I think of the cause, and then I bless her. But the very desperation of my circumstances has suggested a remedy, and this I would inform you of at once. Can you come to me, since I must not come to you? I will wait tomorrow night at the edge of the plantation by which you entered the column. I will not detain you. My plan can be told in 10 words." The night after posting this missive to her he waited at the spot mentioned. It was a melancholy evening for coming abroad. A blusterous wind had risen during the day, and still continued to increase. Yet he stood watchful in the darkness, and was ultimately rewarded by discerning a shady muffled shape that embodied itself from the field, accompanied by the scratching of silk over stubble. There was no longer any disguise as to the nature of their meeting. It was a lover's assignation, pure and simple, and bodily realizing it as such, he clasped her in his arms. "I cannot bear this any longer," he exclaimed. 3 months since I saw you alone. Only a glimpse of you in church or a bow from the distance in all that time. What a fearful struggle this keeping apart has been!" "Yet I would have had strength to persist, since it seemed best," she murmured when she could speak. "Had not your words on your condition so alarmed and saddened me. This inability of yours to work or study or observe, it is terrible. So terrible a sting is it to my conscience that your hint about a remedy has brought me instantly. Yet I don't altogether mind it, since it is you, my dear, who have displaced the work, and yet the loss of time nearly distracts me, when I have neither the power to work nor the delight of your company." "But your remedy? Oh, I cannot help guessing it. Yes, you are going away." "Let us ascend the column. We can speak more at ease there. Then I will explain all. I would not ask you to climb so high, but the hut is not yet furnished." He entered the cabin at the foot, and having lighted a small lantern conducted her up the hollow staircase to the top, where he closed the slides of the dome to keep out the wind, and placed the observing chair for her. "I can stay only 5 minutes," she said, without sitting down. "You said it was important that you should see me, and I have come. I assure you it is at great risk. If I am seen here at this time, I am ruined for ever. But what would I not do for you? Oh, Swithin, your remedy, is it to go away? There is no other, and yet I dread that like death." "I can tell you in a moment, but I must begin at the beginning. All this ruinous idleness and distraction is caused by the misery of our not being able to meet with freedom. The fear that something may snatch you from me keeps me in a state of perpetual apprehension." "It is too true also of me. I dread that some accident may happen, and waste my days in meeting the trouble half-way." "So our lives go on, and our labours stand still. Now for the remedy, dear Lady Constantine. Allow me to marry you." She started, and the winds without shook the building, sending up a yet intenser moan from the firs. "I mean, marry you quite privately. Let it make no difference whatever to our outward lives for years, for I know that in my present position you cannot possibly acknowledge me as your husband publicly. But by marrying at once we secure the certainty that we cannot be divided by accident, coaxing, or artifice, and, at ease on that point, I shall embrace my studies with the old vigour, and you yours." Lady Constantine was so agitated at the unexpected boldness of such a proposal from one hitherto so boyish and deferential, that she sank into the observing chair, her intention to remain for only a few minutes being quite forgotten. She covered her face with her hands. "No, no, I dare not," she whispered. "But is there a single thing else left to do?" he pleaded, kneeling down beside her, less in supplication than in abandonment. "What else can we do?" "Wait till you are famous." "But I cannot be famous unless I strive, and this distracting condition prevents all striving." "Could you not strive on if I gave you a promise, a solemn promise, to be yours when your name is fairly well known?" St. Cleeve breathed heavily. "It will be a long, weary time," he said, "and even with your promise I shall work but half-heartedly. Every hour of study will be interrupted with, 'Suppose this or this happens. Suppose somebody persuades her to break her promise. Worse still, suppose some rival maligns me, and so seduces her away.' No, Lady Constantine, dearest, best as you are, that element of distraction would still remain, and where that is, no sustained energy is possible. Many erroneous things have been written and said by the sages, but never did they float a greater fallacy than that love serves as a stimulus to win the loved one by patient toil." "I cannot argue with you," she said weakly. "My only possible other chance would lie in going away," he resumed after a moment's reflection, with his eyes on the lantern flame, which waved and smoked in the currents of air that leaked into the dome from the fierce wind stream without. "If I might take away the equatorial, supposing it possible that I could find some suitable place for observing in the southern hemisphere, say the Cape, I might be able to apply myself to serious work again, after the lapse of a little time. The southern constellations offer a less exhausted field for investigation. I wonder if I might." "You mean," she answered uneasily, "that you might apply yourself to work when your recollection of me began to fade, and my life to become a matter of indifference to you? Yes, go. No, I cannot bear it. The remedy is worse than the disease. I cannot let you go away." "Then how can you refuse the only condition on which I can stay, without ruin to my purpose, and scandal to your name? Dearest, agree to my proposal, as you love both me and yourself." He waited while the fir trees rubbed and prodded the base of the tower, and the wind roared around and shook it, but she could not find words to reply. "Would to God," he burst out, "that I might perish here, like Winstanley in his lighthouse! Then the difficulty would be solved for you." "You are so wrong, so very wrong in saying so!" she exclaimed passionately. "You may doubt my wisdom, pity my short-sightedness, but there is one thing you do know, that I love you dearly." "You do, I know it," he said, softened in a moment. "But it seems such a simple remedy for the difficulty that I cannot see how you can mind adopting it, if you care so much for me as I do for you." "Should we live just as we are exactly, supposing I agreed?" she faintly inquired. "Yes, that's my idea." "Quite privately, you say? How could the marriage be quite private?" I would go to London and get a licence. Then you would come to me, and return again immediately after the ceremony. I could return at leisure, and not a soul in the world would know what had taken place. Think, dearest, with what a free conscience you would then assist me in my efforts to plumb these deeps above us. Any feelings that you may now have against clandestine meetings as such would then be removed, and our hearts would be at rest. There was a certain scientific practicability even in his love-making, and here it came out excellently. But she sat on with suspended breath, her heart wildly beating, while he waited in open-mouthed expectation. Each was swayed by the emotion within them, much as the candle-flame was swayed by the tempest without. It was the most critical evening of their lives. The pale rays of the little lantern fell upon her beautiful face, snugly and neatly bound in by her black bonnet, but not a beam of the lantern leaked out into the night to suggest to any watchful eye that human life in its highest excitement was beating within the dark and isolated tower. For the dome had no windows, and every shutter that afforded an opening for the telescope was hermetically closed. Predilections and misgivings so equally strove within her still youthful breast that she could not utter a word. Her intention wheeled this way and that like the balance of a watch. His unexpected proposition had brought about the smartest encounter of inclination with prudence, of impulse with reserve, that she had ever known. Of all the reasons that she had expected him to give for his urgent request to see her this evening, an offer of marriage was probably the last. Whether or not she had ever amused herself with hypothetical fancies on such a subject, and it was only natural that she would vaguely have done so, the courage of her protégé coolly to advance it, without a hint from herself that such a proposal would be tolerated, showed her that there was more in his character than she had reckoned on, and the discovery almost frightened her. The humour, attitude, and tenor of her attachment had been quite of unpremeditated quality, unsuggestive of any such audacious solution to their distresses as this. "I repeat my question, dearest," he said, after a long pause. "Shall it be done? Or shall I exile myself, and study as best I can, in some distant country, out of sight and sound?" "Are those the only alternatives? Yes, yes, I suppose they are." She waited yet another moment, bent over his kneeling figure, and kissed his forehead. "Yes, it shall be done," she whispered. "I will marry you." "My angel, I am content." He drew her yielding form to his heart, and her head sunk upon his shoulder, as he pressed his two lips continually upon hers. To such had the study of celestial physics brought them in the space of 8 months, 1 week, and a few odd days. "I am weaker than you, far the weaker," she went on, her tears falling. "Rather than lose you out of my sight, I will marry you without stipulation or condition. But I put it to your kindness. Grant me one little request." He instantly assented. "It is that in consideration of my peculiar position in this county—oh, you can't understand it—you will not put an end to the absolute secrecy of our relationship without my full assent, and that you will never come to Welland House without first discussing with me the advisability of the visit, accepting my opinion on the point. There, see how a timid woman tries to fence herself in." "My dear lady love, neither of those two high-handed courses would I have taken, even had you not stipulated against them. The very essence of our marriage plan is that those two conditions are kept. I see as well as you do, even more than you do, how important it is for the present, ay, for a long time hence, that I should be but the curate's lonely son, unattached to anybody or anything, with no object of interest but his science, and you the recluse lady of the manor, to whom he is only an acquaintance. See what deceits love sows in honest minds. It would be a humiliation to you at present that I could not bear, if a marriage between us were made public, an inconvenience without any compensating advantage." "I am so glad you assume it without my setting it before you. Now I know you are not only good and true, but politic and trustworthy." "Well then, here is our covenant. My lady swears to marry me. I, in return for such great courtesy, swear never to compromise her by intruding at Welland House, and to keep the marriage concealed, till I have won a position worthy of her."
"Or till I request it to be made known," she added, possibly foreseeing a contingency which had not occurred to him.
"Or till you request it," he repeated.
"It is agreed," murmured Lady Constantine. End of chapter 15.
Chapter 17 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 17. In her days of prosperity, Lady Constantine had often gone to the city of Bath, either frivolously, for shopping purposes, or musico-religiously, to attend choir festivals in the Abbey, so there was nothing surprising in her reverting to an old practice. That the journey might appear to be of a somewhat similar nature, she took with her the servant who had been accustomed to accompany her on former occasions. Though the woman, having now left her service and settled in the village as the wife of Anthony Green, with a young child on her hands, could with some difficulty leave home. Lady Constantine overcame the anxious mother's scruples by providing that young Green should be well cared for, and knowing that she could count upon this woman's fidelity, if upon anybody's in case of an accident, for it was chiefly Lady Constantine's exertions that had made an honest wife of Mrs. Green, she departed for a fortnight's absence. The next day found mistress and maid settled in lodgings in an old plum-coloured brick street, which 100 years ago could boast of rank and fashion among its residents, though now the broad fanlight over each broad door admitted the sun to the halls of a lodging-house keeper only. The lamp-posts were still those that had done duty with oil lights, and rheumatic old coachmen and postilions that once had driven and ridden gloriously from London to Land's End, ornamented with their bent persons and bow-legs the pavement in front of the chief inn, in the sorry hope of earning sixpence to keep body and soul together. "We're well informed of the time of day, my lady," said Mrs. Green, as she pulled down the blinds in Lady Constantine's room on the evening of their arrival. "There's a church exactly at the back of us, and I hear every hour strike." Lady Constantine said that she had noticed that there was a church quite near. "Well, it is better that we have that at the back than other folks' winders, and if your ladyship wants to go there, it won't be far to walk." "That's what occurred to me," said Lady Constantine, "if I should want to go." During the ensuing days she felt to the utmost the tediousness of waiting merely that time might pass. Not a soul knew her there, and she knew not a soul, a circumstance which, while it added to her sense of secrecy, intensified her solitude. Occasionally she went to a shop with Green as her companion. Though there were purchases to be made, they were by no means of a pressing nature, and but poorly filled up the vacancies of these strange speculative days, days surrounded by a shade of fear, yet poetized by sweet expectation. On the 13th day she told Green that she was going to take a walk, and leaving the house she passed by the obscurest streets to the Abbey. After wandering about beneath the aisles till her courage was screwed up to its highest, she went out at the other side, and looking timidly around to see if anybody followed, walked on till she came to a certain door, which she reached just at the moment when her heart began to sink to its very lowest, rendering all the screwing up in vain. Whether it was because the month was October, or from any other reason, the deserted aspect of the quarter in general sat especially on this building. Moreover, the pavement was up, and heaps of stone and gravel obscured the footway. Nobody was coming, nobody was going, in that thoroughfare. She appeared to be the single one of the human race bent upon marriage business, which seemed to have been unanimously abandoned by all the rest of the world as proven folly. But she thought of Swithin, his blonde hair, ardent eyes, and eloquent lips, and was carried onward by the very reflection. Entering the surrogate's room, Lady Constantine managed, at the last juncture, to state her errand in tones so collected as to startle even herself, to which her listener replied also as if the whole thing were the most natural in the world. When it came to the affirmation that she had lived 15 days in the parish, she said with dismay, "Oh no, I thought the 15 days meant the interval of residence before the marriage takes place. I have lived here only 13 days and a half. Now I must come again." "Ah, well, I think you not need be so particular," said the surrogate. "As a matter of fact, though the letter of the law requires 15 days' residence, many people make 5 sufficient. The provision is inserted, as you are doubtless aware, to hinder runaway marriages as much as possible, and secret unions, and other such objectionable practices. You need not come again." That evening Lady Constantine wrote to Swithin St. Cleeve the last letter of the fortnight. "My dearest, do come as soon as you can. By a sort of favouring blunder I have been able to shorten the time of waiting by a day. Come at once,
for I am almost broken down with apprehension. It seems rather rash at moments, all this, and I wish you were here to reassure me. I did not know I should feel so alarmed. I am frightened at every footstep, and dread lest anybody who knows me should accost me and find out why I am here. I sometimes wonder how I could have agreed to come and enact your part, but I did not realize how trying it would be. You ought not to have asked me, Swithin. Upon my word, it was too cruel of you, and I will punish you for it when you come. But I won't upbraid. I hope the homestead is repaired that has cost me all this sacrifice of modesty. If it were anybody in the world but you in question, I would rush home, without waiting here for the end of it. I really think I would. But, dearest, no. I must show my strength now, or let it be forever hid. The barriers of ceremony are broken down between us, and it is for the best that I am here. And yet at no point in this trying prelude need Lady Constantine have feared for her strength. Deeds in this connection demand a particular kind of courage that such perfervid women are endowed with, the courage of their emotions, in which young men are often lamentably deficient. Her fear was, in truth, the fear of being discovered in an unwonted position, not of the act itself. And though her letter was in its way a true exposition of her feeling, had it been necessary to go through the whole legal process over again, she would have been found equal to the emergency. It had been for some days a point of anxiety with her what to do with Green during the morning of the wedding. Chance unexpectedly helped her in this difficulty. The day before the purchase of the licence, Green came to Lady Constantine with a letter in her hand from her husband Anthony, her face as long as a fiddle. "I hope there is nothing the matter," said Lady Constantine. "The child's took bad, my lady," said Mrs. Green, with suspended floods of water in her eyes. "I love the child better than I shall love all them that's coming put together, for he's been a good boy to his mother ever since 12 weeks afore he was born. 'Twas he, a tender dearie, that made Anthony marry me, and thereby turned hisself from a little calamity to a little blessing. For, as you know, the man were a backward man in the church part of matrimony, my lady, though he'll do anything when he's forced by a bit of his manly feelings. And now to lose the child. Oh, what shall I do?" "Well, you want to go home at once, I suppose?" Mrs. Green explained between her sobs that such was her desire, and though this was a day or two sooner than her mistress had wished to be left alone, she consented to Green's departure. So during the afternoon her woman went off, with directions to prepare for Lady Constantine's return in 2 or 3 days. But as the exact day of her return was uncertain, no carriage was to be sent to the station to meet her, her intention being to hire one from the hotel. Lady Constantine was now left in utter solitude to await her lover's arrival. End of chapter 17. Chapter 18 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 18. A more beautiful October morning than that of the next day never beamed into the Welland valleys. The early dissolution of leafage was setting in apace. The foliage of the park trees rapidly resolved itself into the multitude of complexions which marked the subtle grades of decay, reflecting wet lights of such innumerable hues that it was a wonder to think their beauties only a repetition of scenes that had been exhibited there on scores of previous Octobers, and had been allowed to pass away without a single dirge from the imperturbable beings who walked among them. Far in the shadows, semi-opaque screens of blue haze made mysteries of the commonest gravel pit, dingle, or recess. The wooden cabin at the foot of Rings Hill Spear had been furnished by Swithin as a sitting and sleeping apartment some little while before this time, for he had found it highly convenient during night observations at the top of the column to remain on the spot all night, not to disturb his grandmother by passing in and out of the house, and to save himself the labour of incessantly crossing the field. He would much have liked to tell her the secret, and had it been his own to tell, would probably have done so, but sharing it with an objector who knew not his grandmother's affections so well as he did himself, there was no alternative to holding his tongue. The more effectually to guard it, he decided to sleep at the cabin during the 2 or 3 nights previous to his departure, leaving word at the homestead that in a day or two he was going on an excursion. It was very necessary to start early. Long before the great eye of the sun was lifted high enough to glance into the Welland valley, St. Cleeve arose from his bed in the cabin and prepared to depart, cooking his breakfast upon a little stove in the corner. The young rabbits, littered during the foregoing summer, watched his preparations through the open door from the grey dawn without, as he bustled, half dressed, in and out under the boughs and among the blackberries and brambles that grew around. It was a strange place for a bridegroom to perform his toilet in, but considering the unconventional nature of the marriage, a not inappropriate one. What events had been enacted in that earthen camp since it was first thrown up, nobody could say, but the primitive simplicity of the young man's preparations accorded well with the prehistoric spot on which they were made. Embedded under his feet were possibly even now rude trinkets that had been worn at bridal ceremonies of the early inhabitants. Little signified those ceremonies today, or the happiness or otherwise of the contracting parties. That his own right nevertheless signified much was the inconsequent reasoning of Swithin, as it is of many another bridegroom besides, and he, like the rest, went on with his preparations in that mood which sees in his stale repetition the wondrous possibilities of an untried move. Then through the wet cobwebs that hung like movable diaphragms on each blade and bough, he pushed his way down to the furrow which led from the fir-tree island to the wide world beyond the field. He was not a stranger to enterprise, and still less to the contemplation of enterprise, but an enterprise such as this he had never even outlined. That his dear lady was troubled at the situation he had placed her in by not going himself on that errand, he could see from her letter, but believing an immediate marriage with her to be the true way of restoring to both that equanimity necessary to serene philosophy, he held it of little account how the marriage was brought about, and happily began his journey towards her place of sojourn. He passed through a little copse before leaving the parish, the smoke from newly lit fires rising like the stems of blue trees out of the few cottage chimneys. Here he heard a quick, familiar footstep in the path ahead of him, and turning the corner of the bushes confronted a foot-post on his way to Welland. In answer to St. Cleeve's query if there was anything for himself, the postman handed out one letter and proceeded on his route. Swithin opened and read the letter as he walked, till it brought him to a standstill by the importance of its contents. They were enough to agitate a more phlegmatic youth than he. He leant over the wicket which came in his path, and endeavoured to comprehend the sense of the whole. The large long envelope contained first a letter from a solicitor in a northern town, informing him that his paternal great uncle, who had recently returned from the Cape, whither he had gone in an attempt to repair a broken constitution, was now dead and buried. This great uncle's name was like a new creation to Swithin. He had held no communication with the young man's branch of the family for innumerable years, never in fact since the marriage of Swithin's father with the simple daughter of Welland Farm. He had been a bachelor to the end of his life, and had amassed a fairly good professional fortune by a long and extensive medical practice in the smoky, dreary manufacturing town in which he had lived and died. Swithin had always been taught to think of him as the embodiment of all that was unpleasant in man. He was narrow, sarcastic, and shrewd to unseemliness. That very shrewdness had enabled him, without much professional profundity, to establish his large and lucrative connection, which lay almost entirely among a class who neither looked nor cared for drawing-room courtesies. However, what Dr. St. Cleeve had been as a practitioner matters little. He was now dead, and the bulk of his property had been left to persons with whom this story has nothing to do. But Swithin was informed that out of it there was a bequest of £600 a year to himself, payment of which was to begin with his 21st year, to continue for his life unless he should marry before reaching the age of 25. In the latter precocious and objectionable event, his annuity would be forfeited. The accompanying letter, said the solicitor, would explain all. This, the second letter, was from his uncle to himself, written about a month before the former's death and deposited with his will, to be forwarded to his nephew when that event should have taken place. Swithin read, with the solemnity that such posthumous epistles inspire, the following words from one who, during life, had never once addressed him. Dear nephew, you will doubtless experience some astonishment at receiving a communication from one whom you have never personally known, and who, when it comes into your hands, will be beyond the reach of your knowledge. Perhaps I am the loser by this lifelong mutual ignorance. Perhaps I am much to blame for it, perhaps not. But such reflections are profitless at this date. I have written with quite other views than to work up a sentimental regret on such an amazingly remote hypothesis as that the fact of a particular pair of people not meeting among the millions of other pairs of people who have never met is a great calamity either to the world in general or to themselves. The occasion of my addressing you is briefly this. 9 months ago a report casually reached me that your scientific studies were pursued by you with great ability, and that you were a young man of some promise as an astronomer. My own scientific proclivities rendered the report more interesting than it might otherwise have been to me, and it came upon me quite as a surprise that any issue of your father's marriage should have so much in him, or you might have seen more of me in former years than you are ever likely to do now. My health had then begun to fail, and I was starting for the Cape, or I should have come myself to inquire to your condition and prospects. I did not return till 6 months later, and as my health had not improved, I sent a trusty friend to examine into your life, pursuits, and circumstances, without your own knowledge, and to report his observations to me. This he did. Through him I learnt of favourable news. 1. That you worked assiduously at the science of astronomy. 2. That everything was auspicious in the career you had chosen. Of unfavourable news. 1. That the small income at your command, even when eked out by the sum to which you would be entitled on your grandmother's death and the freehold of the homestead, would be inadequate to support you becomingly as a scientific man, whose lines of work were of a nature not calculated to produce emoluments for many years, if ever. 2. That there was something in your path worse than narrow means, and that something was a woman. To save you, if possible, from ruin on these heads, I take the preventative measures detailed below. The chief step is, as my solicitor will have informed you, that at the age of 25, the sum of £600 a year will be settled on you for life, provided you have not married before reaching that age. A yearly gift of an equal sum to be also provisionally made to you in the interim, and vice versa, that if you do marry before reaching the age of 25, you will receive nothing from the date of the marriage. One object of my bequest is that you may have resources sufficient to enable you to travel and study the southern constellations. When at the Cape, after hearing of your pursuits, I was much struck with the importance of those constellations to an astronomer just pushing into notice. There is more to be made of the southern hemisphere than ever has been made of it yet. The mind is not so thoroughly worked as the northern, and thither your studies should tend. The only other preventative step in my power is that of exhortation, at which I am not an adept. Nevertheless, I say to you, Swithin St. Cleeve, don't make a fool of yourself, as your father did. If your studies are to be worth anything, believe me, they must be carried on without the help of a woman. Avoid her, and every one of the sex, if you mean to achieve any worthy thing. Eschew all of that sort for many a year yet. Moreover, I say, the lady of your acquaintance avoid in particular. I have heard nothing against her moral character hitherto. I have no doubt it has been excellent. She may have many good qualities, both of heart and of mind. But she has, in addition to her original disqualification as a companion for you, that is, that of sex, these two serious drawbacks. She is much older than yourself. Much older, said Swithin resentfully. And she is so impoverished that the title she derives from her late husband is a positive objection. Beyond this, frankly, I don't think well of her. I don't think well of any woman who dotes upon a man younger than herself. To care to be the first fancy of a young fellow like you shows no great common sense in her. If she were worth her salt, she would have too much pride to be intimate with a youth in your unassured position, to say no worse. She is old enough to know that a liaison with her may, and most certainly would, be your ruin. And on the other hand, that a marriage would be preposterous, unless she is a complete goose, and in that case there is even more reason for avoiding her than if she were in her few senses. A woman of honourable feeling, nephew, would be careful to do nothing to hinder you in your career, as this putting of herself in your way most certainly will. Yet I hear that she professes a great anxiety on this same future of yours as a physicist. The best way in which she can show the reality of her anxiety is by leaving you to yourself. Perhaps she persuades herself that she is doing you no harm. Well, let her have the benefit of the possible belief, but depend upon it that in truth she gives the lie to her conscience by maintaining such a transparent fallacy. Women's brains are not formed for assisting at any profound science. They lack the power to see things except in the concrete. She'll blab your most secret plans and theories to every one of her acquaintance."
"She's got none," said Swithin, beginning to get warm.
"And make them appear ridiculous by announcing them before they are matured. If you attempt to study with a woman, you'll be ruled by her to entertain fancies instead of theories, air castles instead of intentions, qualms instead of opinions, sickly prepossessions instead of reasoned calculations. Your wide heaven of study, young man, will soon reduce itself to the miserable narrow expanse of her face, and your myriad of stars to her two trumpery eyes. A woman waking a young man's passions just at a moment when he is endeavouring to shine intellectually is doing little less than committing a crime. Like a certain philosopher, I would, upon my soul, have all young men from 18 to 25 kept under barrels, seeing how often, in the lack of some such sequestering process, the woman sits down before each as his destiny, and too frequently enervates his purpose, till he abandons the most promising course ever conceived. But no more. I now leave your fate in your own hands. Your well-wishing relative, Jocelyn St. Cleeve, Doctor in Medicine." As coming from a bachelor and hardened misogynist of 72, the opinions herein contained were nothing remarkable, but their practical result, in restricting the sudden endowment of Swithin's researches by conditions which turned the favour into a harassment, was, at this unique moment, discomfiting and distracting in the highest degree. Sensational, however, as the letter was, the passionate intention of the day was not hazarded for more than a few minutes thereby. The truth was, the caution and bribe came too late, too unexpectedly, to be of influence. They were the sort of thing which required fermentation to render them effective. Had St. Cleeve received the exhortation a month earlier, had he been able to run over in his mind at every wakeful hour of 30 consecutive nights a private catechism on the possibilities opened up by this annuity, there is no telling what might have been the stress of such a web of perplexity upon him, a young man whose love for celestial physics was second to none. But to have held before him at the last moment the picture of a future advantage that he had never once thought of, or discounted for present staying power, it affected him about as much as the view of horizons shown by sheet lightning. He saw an immense prospect. It went, and the world was as before. He caught the train at Warborne and moved rapidly towards Bath, not precisely in the same key as when he had dressed in the hut at dawn, but as regarded the mechanical part of the journey as unhesitatingly as before. And with the change of scene his gloom left him. His bosom's lord sat lightly in his throne. St. Cleeve was not sufficiently in mind of poetical literature to remember that wise poets are accustomed to read that lightness of bosom inversely. Swithin thought it an omen of good fortune, and as thinking is causing in not a few such cases, he was perhaps, in spite of the poets, right. End of chapter 18. Chapter 19 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 19. At the station Lady Constantine appeared, standing expectant. He saw her face from the window of the carriage long before she saw him. He no sooner saw her than he was satisfied to his heart's content with his prize. If his great uncle had offered him from the grave a kingdom instead of her, he would not have accepted it. Swithin jumped out, and nature never painted in a woman's face more devotion than appeared in my lady's at that moment. To both the situation seemed like a beautiful allegory, not to be examined too closely, lest its defects of correspondence with real life should be apparent. They almost feared to shake hands in public, so much depended upon their passing that morning without molestation. A fly was called, and they drove away. "Take this," she said, handing him a folded paper. "It belongs to you rather than to me." At crossings and other occasional pauses, pedestrians turned their faces and looked at the pair, for no reason but that among so many there were naturally a few of the sort who have eyes to note what incidents come in their way as they plod on. But the two in the vehicle could not but fear that these innocent beholders had special detective designs on them. "You look so dreadfully young," she said with humorous fretfulness, as they drove along. Swithin's cheeks being amazingly fresh from the morning air. "Do try to appear a little haggard, that the parson mayn't ask us awkward questions." Nothing further happened, and they were set down opposite a shop about 50 yards from the church door at 5 minutes to 11. "We'll dismiss the fly," she said. "It will only attract idlers." On turning the corner and reaching the church, they found the door ajar, but the building contained only two persons, a man and a woman, the clerk and his wife, as they learnt. Swithin asked when the clergyman would arrive. The clerk looked at his watch and said, "At just on 11 o'clock." "He ought to be here," said Swithin. "Yes," replied the clerk as the hour struck. "The fact is, sir, he's a deputy, and apt to be rather wandering in his wits as regards time and such like, which have stood in the way of the man's getting a benefit. But no doubt he'll come." "The regular incumbent is away, then?" "He's gone for his bare passing's fortnight, that's all. And we was forced to put up with a weak talented man, or none. The best men goes into brewing, or into the shipping nowadays, you see, sir. Doctrine's been rather shaddery at present, and your money's worth not sure in our line. So we church officers be left poorly provided with men for odd jobs. I'll tell you what, sir, I think I'd better run round to the gentleman's lodgings and try to find him." "Pray do," said Lady Constantine. The clerk left the church, his wife busied herself with the dusting at the further end, and Swithin and Viviette were left to themselves. The imagination travels so rapidly, and a woman's forethought is so assumptive, that the clerk's departure had no sooner doomed them to inaction than it was borne in upon Lady Constantine's mind that she would not become the wife of Swithin St. Cleeve, either to-day or at any other day. Her divinations were continually misleading her, she knew, but a hitch at the moment of marriage surely had a meaning in it. "Ah, the marriage is not to be," she said to herself. "This is a fatality." It was 20 minutes past, and no parson had arrived. Swithin took her hand. "If it cannot be today, it can be tomorrow," he whispered. "I cannot say," she answered. "Something tells me no." It was almost impossible that she could know anything of the deterrent force exercised on Swithin by his dead uncle that morning. Yet her manner tallied so curiously well with such knowledge that he was struck by it, and remained silent. "You have a black tie," she continued, looking at him. "Yes," replied Swithin. "I bought it on my way here." "Why could it not have been less sombre in colour?" "My great uncle is dead." "You had a great uncle? You never told me." "I never saw him in my life. I have only heard about him since his death." He spoke in as quiet and measured a way as he could, but his heart was sinking. She would go on questioning; he could not tell her an untruth. She would discover particulars of that great uncle's provision for him, which he, Swithin, was throwing away for her sake, and she would refuse to be his for his own sake. His conclusion at this moment was precisely what hers had been 5 minutes sooner, that they were never to be husband and wife. But she did not continue her questions, for the simplest of all reasons. Hasty footsteps were audible in the entrance, and the parson was seen coming up the aisle, the clerk behind him wiping the beads of perspiration from his face. The somewhat sorry clerical specimen shook hands with him and entered the vestry, and the clerk came up and opened the book. "The poor gentleman's memory is a bit topsy-turvy," whispered the latter. "He had got it in his mind that 'twere a funeral, and I found him wandering about the cemetery a looking for us. However, all's well as ends well." And the clerk wiped his forehead again. "How ill-omened," murmured Viviette. But the parson came out robed at this moment, and the clerk put on his ecclesiastical countenance and looked in his book. Lady Constantine's momentary languor passed; her blood resumed its courses with a new spring. The grave utterances of the church then rolled out upon the palpitating pair, and no couple ever joined their whispers thereto with more fervency than they. Lady Constantine, as she continued to be called by the outside world, though she liked to think herself the Mrs. St. Cleeve that she legally was, had told Green that she might be expected at Welland in a day, or 2 or 3, as circumstances should dictate. Though the time of return was thus left open, it was deemed advisable, by both Swithin and herself, that her journey back should not be deferred after the next day, in case any suspicions might be aroused.
As for St. Cleeve, his comings and goings were of no consequence. It was seldom known whether he was at home or abroad, by reason of his frequent seclusion at the column. Late in the afternoon of the next day he accompanied her to the Bath station, intending himself to remain in that city till the following morning. But when a man or youth has such a tender article on his hands as a 30-hour bride, it is hardly in the power of his strongest reason to set her down at a railway and send her off like a superfluous portmanteau. Hence the experiment of parting so soon after their union proved excruciatingly severe to these. The evening was dull. The breeze of autumn crept fitfully through every slit and aperture in the town. Not a soul in the world seemed to notice or care about anything they did. Lady Constantine sighed, and there was no resisting it. He could not leave her thus. He decided to get into the train with her, and to keep her company for at least a few stations on her way. It drew on to be a dark night, and seeing that there was no serious risk after all, he prolonged his journey with her so far as to the junction at which the branch line to Warborne forked off. Here it was necessary to wait a few minutes before either he could go back or she could go on. They wandered outside the station doorway into the gloom of the road, and there agreed to part. While she yet stood holding his arm, a phaeton sped towards the station entrance, where, in ascending the slope to the door, the horse suddenly jibbed. The gentleman who was driving, being either impatient or possessed with the theory that all jibbers may be started by severe whipping, applied the lash. As a result of it, the horse thrust round the carriage to where they stood, and the end of the driver's sweeping whip cut across Lady Constantine's face with such severity as to cause her an involuntary cry. Swithin turned her round to the lamplight and discerned a streak of blood on her cheek. By this time the gentleman who had done the mischief, with many words of regret, had given the reins to his man and dismounted. "I will go into the waiting room for a moment," whispered Viviette hurriedly, and loosing her hand from his arm she pulled down her veil and vanished inside the building. The stranger came forward and raised his hat. He was a slightly built and apparently town-bred man of 28 or 30. His manner of address was at once careless and conciliatory. "I am greatly concerned at what I have done," he said. "I sincerely trust that your wife—" But observing the youthfulness of Swithin, he withdrew the word suggested by the manner of Swithin towards Lady Constantine. "I trust the young lady was not seriously cut." "I trust not," said Swithin, with some vexation. "Where did the lash touch her?" "Straight down her cheek." "Do let me go to her, and learn how she is, and humbly apologize." "I'll inquire." He went to the ladies' room in which Viviette had taken refuge. She met him at the door, her handkerchief to her cheek, and Swithin explained that the driver of the phaeton had sent to make inquiries. "I cannot see him," she whispered. "He is my brother Louis. He is, no doubt, going on by train to my house. Don't let him recognize me. We must wait till he is gone." Swithin thereupon went out again, and told the young man that a cut on her face was not serious, but that she could not see him, after which they parted. St. Cleeve then heard him ask for a ticket to Warborne, which confirmed Lady Constantine's view that he was going on to her house. When the branch train had moved off, Swithin returned to his bride, who waited in a trembling state within. On being informed that he had departed, she showed herself much relieved. "Where does your brother come from?" said Swithin. "From London immediately. Rio before that. He has a friend or two in this neighbourhood, and visits here occasionally. I have seldom or never spoken to you of him, because of his long absence." "Is he going to settle near you?" "No, nor anywhere, I fear. He is, or rather was, in the diplomatic service. He was first a clerk in the Foreign Office, and was afterwards appointed attaché at Rio Janeiro, but he has resigned the appointment. I wish he had not." Swithin asked why he resigned. "He complained of the banishment, and the climate, and everything that people complain of who are determined to be dissatisfied. Though, poor fellow, there is some ground for his complaints. Perhaps some people would say that he is idle, but he is scarcely that. He is rather restless than idle, so that he never persists in anything. Yet if a subject takes his fancy, he will follow it up with exemplary patience till something diverts him. He is not kind to you, is he, dearest?" "Why do you think that?" "Your manner seems to say so." "Well,
He may not always be kind. But look at my face. Does the mark show?" A streak, straight as a meridian, was visible down her cheek. The blood had been brought almost to the surface, but was not quite through, that which had originally appeared thereon having possibly come from the horse. It signified that tomorrow the red line would be a black one. Swithin informed her that her brother had taken a ticket for Warborne, and she at once perceived that he was going on to visit her at Welland, though from his letter she had not expected him so soon by a few days. "Meanwhile," continued Swithin, "you can now get home only by the late train, having missed that one." "But, Swithin, don't you see my new trouble? If I go to Welland House to-night, and find my brother just arrived there, and he sees this cut on my face, which I suppose you described to him—" "I did." "He will know I was the lady with you, whom he called my wife. I wonder why we look husband and wife already. Then what am I to do? For the ensuing 3 or 4 days I bear in my face a clue to his discovery of our secret." "Then you must not be seen. We must stay at an inn here." "Oh no," she said timidly. "It is too near home to be quite safe. We might not be known, but if we were—" "We can't go back to Bath now. I'll tell you, dear Viviette, what we must do. We'll go on to Warborne in separate carriages. We'll meet outside the station. Thence we'll walk to the column in the dark, and I'll keep you as a captive in the cabin till the scar has disappeared." As there was nothing which better recommended itself, this course was decided on, and after taking from her trunk the articles that might be required for an incarceration of 2 or 3 days, they left the said trunk at the cloak room, and went on by the last train, which reached Warborne about 10 o'clock. It was only necessary for Lady Constantine to cover her face with the thick veil that she had provided for this escapade, to walk out of the station without fear of recognition. St. Cleeve came forth from another compartment, and they did not rejoin each other till they had reached a shadowy bend in the old turnpike road, beyond the irradiation of the Warborne lamplight. The walk to Welland was long. It was the walk which Swithin had taken in the rain when he had learnt the fatal forestalment of his stellar discovery. But now he was moved by a less desperate mood, and blamed neither God nor man. They were not pressed for time, and passed along the silent, lonely way with that sense rather of predestination than of choice in their proceedings which the presence of night sometimes imparts. Reaching the park gate, they found it open, and from this they inferred that her brother Louis had arrived. Leaving the house and park on the right, they traced the highway yet a little further, and plunging through the stubble of the opposite field, drew near the isolated earthwork bearing the plantation and tower, which together rose like a flattened dome and lantern from the lighter hued plain of stubble. It was far too dark to distinguish firs from other trees by the eye alone, but the peculiar dialect of sylvan language which the piney multitude used would have been enough to proclaim their class at any time. In the lovers' stealthy progress up the slopes, a dry stick here and there snapped beneath their feet, seeming like a shot of alarm. On being unlocked, the hut was found precisely as Swithin had left it 2 days before. Lady Constantine was thoroughly wearied and sat down, while he gathered a handful of twigs and spikelets from the masses strewn without and lit a small fire, first taking the precaution to blind the little window and relock the door. Lady Constantine looked curiously around by the light of the blaze. The hut was small as the prophet's chamber provided by the Shunammite. In one corner stood the stove, with a little table and chair, a small cupboard hard by, a pitcher of water, a rack overhead with various articles, including a kettle and a gridiron, while the remaining 3 or 4 feet at the other end of the room was fitted out as a dormitory, for Swithin's use during late observations in the tower overhead. "It is not much of a place to offer you," he remarked, smiling, "but at any rate it is a refuge." The cheerful firelight dispersed in some measure Lady Constantine's anxieties. "If we only had something to eat," she said. "Dear me," cried St. Cleeve blankly, "that's a thing I never thought of." "Nor I till now," she replied. He reflected with misgiving. "Beyond a small loaf of bread in the cupboard I have nothing. However, just outside the door there are lots of those little rabbits, about the size of rats, that the keepers call runners, and they are as tame as possible. But I fear I could not catch one now. Yet, dear Viviette, wait a minute, I'll try. You must not be starved."
He softly let himself out, and was gone some time. When he reappeared, he produced not a rabbit, but 4 sparrows and a thrush. "I could do nothing in the way of a rabbit without setting a wire," he said, "but I have managed to get these by knowing where they roost." He showed her how to prepare the birds, and having set her to roast them by the fire, departed with the pitcher to replenish it at the brook which flowed near the homestead in the neighbouring bottom. "They are all asleep at my grandmother's," he informed her when he re-entered, panting with the dripping pitcher. "They imagine me to be 100 miles off." The birds were now ready, and the table was spread. With this fare, eked out by dry toast from the loaf, and moistened with cups of water from the pitcher, to which Swithin added a little wine from the flask he had carried on his journey, they were forced to be content for their supper. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of 2 on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. 2 on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 20. When Lady Constantine awoke the next morning, Swithin was nowhere to be seen. Before she was quite ready for breakfast, she heard the key turn in the door and felt startled, till she remembered that the comer could hardly be anybody but he. He brought a basket with provisions, an extra cup and saucer, and so on. In a short space of time the kettle began singing on the stove, and the morning meal was ready. The sweet resinous air from the firs blew in upon them as they sat at breakfast. The birds hopped round the door, which somewhat riskily they ventured to keep open, and at their elbow rose the lank column into an upper realm of sunlight, which only reached the cabin in fitful darts and flashes through the trees. "I could be happy here for ever," she said, clasping his hand. "I wish I could never see my great gloomy house again, since I am not rich enough to throw it open and live there as I ought to. Poverty of this sort is not unpleasant, at any rate. What are you thinking of?" "I'm thinking about my outing this morning. On reaching my grandmother's, she was only a little surprised to see me. I was obliged to breakfast there, or appear to do so, to divert suspicion, and this food is supposed to be wanted for my dinner or supper. There will, of course, be no difficulty in my obtaining an ample supply for any length of time, as I can take what I like from the buttery without observation. But as I looked in my grandmother's face this morning, and saw her looking affectionately in mine, and thought how she had never concealed anything from me, and had always had my welfare at heart, I felt that I should like to tell her what we have done." "Oh no, please not, Swithin!" she exclaimed piteously. "Very well," he answered. "On no consideration will I do so without your consent." And no more was said on the matter. The morning was passed in applying wet rag and other remedies to the purple line on Viviette's cheek, and in the afternoon they set up the equatorial under the replaced dome, to have it in order for night observations. The evening was clear, dry, and remarkably cold by comparison with the daytime weather. After a frugal supper they replenished the stove with charcoal from the homestead, which they also burnt during the day, an idea of Viviette's, that the smoke from a wood fire might not be seen more frequently than was consistent with the occasional occupation of the cabin by Swithin, as heretofore. At 8 o'clock she insisted upon his ascending the tower for observations, in strict pursuance of the idea on which their marriage had been based, namely, that of restoring regularity to his studies. The sky had a new and startling beauty that night. A broad fluctuating semicircular arch of vivid white light spanned the northern quarter of the heavens, reaching from the horizon to the star Eta in the greater Bear. It was the aurora borealis, just risen up for the winter season out of the freezing seas of the north, where every autumn vapour was now undergoing rapid congelation. "Oh, let us sit and look at it," she said, as they turned their backs upon the equatorial and the southern glories of the heavens to this new beauty in a quarter which they seldom contemplated. The lustre of the fixed stars was diminished to a sort of blueness. Little by little the arch grew higher against the dark void, like the form of the spirit maiden in the shades of Glenfinlas, till its crown drew near the zenith and threw a tissue over the whole waggon and horses of the great northern constellation. Brilliant shafts radiated from the convexity of the arch, coming and going silently. The temperature fell, and Lady Constantine drew her wrap more closely around her. "We'll go down," said Swithin. "The cabin is beautifully warm. Why should we try to observe tonight? Indeed, we cannot. The aurora light overpowers everything. Very well. Tomorrow night there will be no interruption. I shall be gone. You will leave me tomorrow, Viviette? Yes, tomorrow morning. The truth was that, with the progress of the hours and days, the conviction had been borne in upon Viviette more and more forcibly that not for kingdoms and principalities could she afford to risk the discovery of her presence here by a living soul. "But let me see your face, dearest," he said. "I don't think it will be safe for you to meet your brother yet." As it was too dark to see her face on the summit where they sat, they descended the winding staircase, and in the cabin Swithin examined the damaged cheek. The line, though so far attenuated as not to be observable by any one but a close observer, had not quite disappeared. But in consequence of her reiterated and almost tearful anxiety to go, and as there was a strong probability that her brother had left the house, Swithin decided to call at Welland next morning and reconnoitre with a view to her return. Locking her in, he crossed the dewy stubble into the park. The house was silent and deserted, and only one tall stalk of smoke ascended from the chimneys. Notwithstanding that the hour was nearly 9, he knocked at the door. "Is Lady Constantine at home?" asked Swithin, with a disingenuousness now habitual, yet unknown to him 6 months before. "No, Mr. St. Cleeve. My lady is not returned from Bath. We expect her every day. Nobody is staying in the house. My lady's brother has been here, but he's gone to Budmouth. He will come again in 2 or 3 weeks, I understand." This was enough. Swithin said he would call again, and returned to the cabin, where, waking Viviette, who was not by nature an early riser, he waited on the column till she was ready to breakfast. When this had been shared they prepared to start. A long walk was before them. Warborne Station lay 5 miles distant, and the next station above that 9 miles. They were bound for the latter, the plan being that she should there take the train to the junction where the whip accident had occurred, claim her luggage, and return to Warborne as if from Bath. The morning was cool and the walk not wearisome. When once they had left behind the stubble field of their environment and the parish of Welland, they sauntered on comfortably, Lady Constantine's spirits rising as she withdrew further from danger. They parted by a little brook, about half a mile from the station, Swithin to return to Welland by the way he had come. Lady Constantine telegraphed from the junction to Warborne for a carriage to be in readiness to meet her on her arrival, and then, waiting for the down train, she travelled smoothly home, reaching Welland House about 5 minutes sooner than Swithin reached the column hard by, after footing it all the way from where they had parted. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of 2 on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. 2 on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 21. From that day forward their life resumed its old channel in general outward aspect. Perhaps the most remarkable feature in their exploit was its comparative effectiveness as an expedient for the end designed, that of restoring calm assiduity to the study of astronomy. Swithin took up his old position as a lonely philosopher at the column, and Lady Constantine lapsed back to immured existence at the house, with apparently not a friend in the parish. The enforced narrowness of life which her limited resources necessitated was now an additional safeguard against the discovery of her relations with St. Cleeve. Her neighbours seldom troubled her, as much it must be owned from a tacit understanding that she was not in a position to return invitations, as from any selfish coldness engendered by her want of wealth. At the first meeting of the secretly united pair after their short honeymoon, they were compelled to behave as strangers to each other. It occurred in the only part of Welland which deserves the name of a village street, and all the labourers were returning to their midday meal, with those of their wives who assisted at outdoor work. Before the eyes of this innocent though quite untrustworthy group, Swithin and his Viviette could only shake hands in passing, though she contrived to say to him in an undertone, "My brother does not yet return for some time. He has gone to Paris. I will be on the lawn this evening if you care to come." It was a fluttered smile that she bestowed upon him, and there was no doubt that every fibre of her heart vibrated afresh at meeting, with such reserve, one who stood in his close relation to her. The shades of night fell early now, and Swithin was at the spot of appointment about the time that he knew her dinner would be over.
It was just where they had met at the beginning of the year, but many changes had resulted since then. The flower beds that had used to be so neatly edged were now jagged and leafy. Black stars appeared on the pale surface of the gravel walks, denoting tufts of grass that grew unmolested there. Lady Constantine's external affair wore just that aspect which suggests that new blood may be advantageously introduced into the line, and new blood had been introduced, in good sooth, with what social result remained to be seen. She silently entered on the scene from the same window which had given her passage in months gone by. They met with a concerted embrace, and St. Cleeve spoke his greeting in whispers. "We are quite safe, dearest," said she. "But the servants?" "My meagre staff consists of only 2 women and the boy, and they are away in the other wing. I thought you would like to see the inside of my house, after showing me the inside of yours, so we will walk through it, instead of staying out here." She let him in through the casement, and they strolled forward softly, Swithin with some curiosity, never before having gone beyond the library and the adjoining room. The whole western side of the house was at this time shut up, her life being confined to 2 or 3 small rooms in the south east corner. The great apartments, through which they now whisperingly walked, wore already that funereal aspect that comes from disuse and inattention. Triangular cobwebs already formed little hammocks for the dust in corners of the wainscot, and a close smell of wood and leather seasoned with mouse droppings pervaded the atmosphere. So seldom was the solitude of these chambers intruded on by human feet that more than once a mouse stood and looked the twain in the face from the arm of a sofa or the top of a cabinet without any great fear. Swithin had no residential ambition whatever, but he was interested in the place. "Will the house ever be thrown open to gaiety, as it was in old times?" said he. "Not unless you make a fortune," she replied laughingly. "It is mine for my life, as you know, but the estate is so terribly saddled with annuities to Sir Blount's distant relatives, one of whom will succeed me here, that I have practically no more than my own little private income to exist on." "And are you bound to occupy the house?" "Not bound, but I must not let it on lease." "And was there any stipulation in the event of your remarriage?" "It was not mentioned." "It is satisfactory to find that you lose nothing by marrying me, at all events, dear Viviette." "I hope you lose nothing either, at least of consequence." "What have I to lose?" "I meant your liberty. Suppose you became a popular physicist. Popularity seems cooling towards art and coquetting with science nowadays, and a better chance offers, and one who would make you a newer and brighter wife than I comes in your way. Will you never regret this? Will you never despise me?" Swithin answered by a kiss, and they again went on, proceeding like a couple of burglars, lest they should draw the attention of the cook or Green. In one of the upper rooms his eyes were attracted by an old chamber organ, which had once been lent for use in the church. He mentioned his recollection of the same, which led her to say, "That reminds me of something. There is to be a confirmation in our parish in the spring, and you once told me that you had never been confirmed. What shocking neglect! Why was it?" "I hardly know. The confusion resulting from my father's death caused it to be forgotten, I suppose." "Now, dear Swithin, you will do this to please me. Be confirmed on the present occasion." "Since I have done without the virtue of it so long, might I not do without it altogether?" "No, no," she said earnestly. "I do wish it, indeed. I am made unhappy when I think you don't care about such serious matters. Without the church to cling to, what have we?" "Each other. But seriously, I should be inverting the established order of spiritual things. People ought to be confirmed before they are married." "That's really of minor consequence. Now don't think slightingly of what so many good men have laid down as necessary to be done. And, dear Swithin, I somehow feel that a certain levity, which has perhaps shown itself in our treatment of the sacrament of marriage, by making a clandestine adventure of what is after all a solemn rite, would be well atoned for by a due seriousness in other points of religious observance. This opportunity should therefore not be passed over. I thought of it all last night, and you are a parson's son, remember, and he would have insisted on it had he been alive. In short, Swithin, do be a good boy and observe the church's ordinances." Lady Constantine, by virtue of her temperament, was necessarily either lover or dévote, and she vibrated so gracefully between these two conditions that nobody who had known the circumstances could have condemned her inconsistencies. To be led into difficulties by those mastering emotions of hers, to aim at escape by turning round and seizing the apparatus of religion, which could only rightly be worked by the very emotions already bestowed elsewhere, it was, after all, but nature's well-meaning attempt to preserve the honour of her daughter's conscience in the trying quandary to which the conditions of sex had given rise. As Viviette could not be confirmed herself, and as Communion Sunday was a long way off, she urged Swithin thus. "And the new bishop is such a good man," she continued. "I used to have a slight acquaintance with him when he was a parish priest." "Very well, dearest. To please you I will be confirmed. My grandmother, too, will be delighted, no doubt." They continued their ramble, Lady Constantine first advancing into rooms with the candle to assure herself that all was empty, and then calling him forward in a whisper. The stillness was broken only by these whispers, or by the occasional crack of a floorboard beneath their tread. At last they sat down, and shading the candle with the screen, she showed him the faded contents of this and that drawer or cabinet, or the wardrobe of some member of the family who had died young early in the century, when muslin reigned supreme, when waists were close to armpits, and muffs as large as smugglers' tubs. These researches among habilimental hulls and husks, whose human kernels had long ago perished, went on for about half an hour, when the companions were startled by a loud ringing at the front door bell. End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 22. Lady Constantine flung down the old-fashioned lacework whose beauty she had been pointing out to Swithin, and exclaimed, "Who can it be? Not Louis, surely?" They listened. An arrival was such a phenomenon at this unfrequented mansion, and particularly a late arrival, that no servant was on the alert to respond to the call, and the visitor rang again, more loudly than before. Sounds of the tardy opening and shutting of a passage door from the kitchen quarter then reached their ears, and Viviette went into the corridor to hearken more attentively. In a few minutes she returned to the wardrobe room in which she had left Swithin. "Yes, it is my brother," she said with difficult composure. "I just caught his voice. He has no doubt come back from Paris to stay. It is a rather vexatious, indolent way he has, never to write to prepare me." "I can easily go away," said Swithin. By this time, however, her brother had been shown into the house, and the footsteps of the page were audible, coming in search of Lady Constantine. "If you will wait here a moment," she said, directing St. Cleeve into a bedchamber which adjoined, "you will be quite safe from interruption, and I will quickly come back." Taking the light, she left him. Swithin waited in darkness. Not more than 10 minutes had passed when a whisper in her voice came through the keyhole. He opened the door. "Yes, he is come to stay," she said. "He is at supper now." "Very well, don't be flurried, dearest. Shall I stay too, as we planned?" "Oh, Swithin, I fear not," she replied anxiously. "You see how it is. Tonight we have broken the arrangement that you should never come here, and this is the result. Will it offend you if I ask you to leave?" "Not in the least. Upon the whole, I prefer the comfort of my own little cabin and homestead to the gauntness and alarms of this place." "There now, I fear you were offended," she said, a tear collecting in her eye. "I wish I was going back with you to the cabin. How happy we were those 3 days of our stay there! But it is better, perhaps, just now, that you should leave me. Yes, these rooms are oppressive. They require a large household to make them cheerful. Yet, Swithin," she added, after reflection, "I will not request you to go. Do as you think best. I will light a night light and leave you here to consider. For myself, I must go downstairs to my brother at once, or he'll wonder what I am doing." She kindled the little night light, and again retreated, closing the door upon him. Swithin stood and waited some time, till he considered that upon the whole it would be preferable to leave. With this intention he emerged and went softly along the dark passage towards the extreme end, where there was a little crooked staircase that would conduct him down to a disused side door.
Descending this stair, he duly arrived at the other side of the house, facing the quarter whence the wind blew, and here he was surprised to catch the noise of rain beating against the windows. It was a state of weather which fully accounted for the visitor's impatient ringing. St. Cleeve was in a minor kind of dilemma. The rain reminded him that his hat and greatcoat had been left downstairs, in the front part of the house, and though he might have gone home without either in ordinary weather, it was not a pleasant feat in the pelting winter rain. Retracing his steps to Viviette's room, he took the light and opened the closet door that he had seen ajar on his way down. Within the closet hung various articles of apparel, upholstery lumber of all kinds filling the back part. Swithin thought he might find here a cloak of hers to throw around him, but finally took down from a peg a more suitable garment, the only one of the sort that was there. It was an old moth-eaten greatcoat, heavily trimmed with fur, and in removing it a companion cap of sealskin was disclosed. Whose can they be? He thought, and a gloomy answer suggested itself. Pooh! He then said, summoning the scientific side of his nature. Matter is matter, and mental association only a delusion. Putting on the garments, he returned the light to Lady Constantine's bedroom, and again prepared to depart as before. Scarcely, however, had he regained the corridor a second time, when he heard a light footstep, seemingly Viviette's, again on the front landing. Wondering what she had wanted with him further, he waited, taking the precaution to step into the closet, till sure it was she. The figure came onward, bent to the keyhole of the bedroom door, and whispered, supposing him still inside, "Swithin, on second thoughts I think you may stay, with safety." Having no further doubt of her personality, he came out with thoughtless abruptness from the closet behind her, and looking round suddenly she beheld his shadowy fur-clad outline. At once she raised her hands in horror, as if to protect herself from him. She uttered a shriek, and turned shudderingly to the wall, covering her face. Swithin would have picked her up in a moment, but by this time he could hear footsteps rushing upstairs in response to her cry. In consternation, and with a view of not compromising her, he effected his retreat as fast as possible, reaching the bend of the corridor just as her brother Louis appeared with a light at the other extremity. "Whatever's the matter, for heaven's sake, Viviette?" said Louis. "My husband!" she involuntarily exclaimed. "What nonsense!" "Oh yes, it is nonsense," she added with an effort. "It was nothing." "But what was the cause of your cry?" She had by this time recovered her reason and judgment. "Oh, it was a trick of the imagination," she said with a faint laugh. "I live so much alone that I get superstitious, and I thought for the moment that I saw an apparition." "Of your late husband?" "Yes, but it was nothing. It was the outline of the tall clock, and the chair behind. Would you mind going down and leaving me to go to my room for a moment?" She entered the bedroom, and her brother went downstairs. Swithin thought it best to leave well alone, and going noiselessly out of the house, plodded through the rain homeward. It was plain that agitations of one sort and another had so weakened Viviette's nerves as to lay her open to every impression. That the clothes he had borrowed were some cast-off garments of the late Sir Blount had occurred to St. Cleeve in taking them, but in the moment of returning to her side he had forgotten this, and the shape they gave to his figure had obviously been a reminder of too sudden a sort for her. Musing thus, he walked along, as if he were still as before the lonely student, dissociated from all mankind, and with no shadow of right or interest in Welland House or its mistress. The great coat and cap were unpleasant companions, but Swithin, having been reared, or having reared himself, in the scientific school of thought, would not give way to a sense of their weirdness. To do so would have been treason to his own beliefs and aims. When nearly home, at a point where his track converged with another path, there approached him from the latter a group of indistinct forms. The tones of their speech revealed them to be Hezzy Biles, Nat Chapman, Fry, and other labourers. Swithin was about to say a word to them, till recollecting his disguise he deemed it advisable to hold his tongue, lest his attire should tell too dangerous a tale as to where he had come from. By degrees they drew closer, their walk being in the same direction. "Good night, stranger," said Nat. The stranger did not reply. All of them paced on abreast of him, and he could perceive in the gloom that their faces were turned inquiringly upon his form. Then a whisper passed from one to another of them. Then Chapman, who was the boldest, dropped immediately behind his heels, and followed there for some distance, taking close observations of his outline, after which the men grouped again and whispered. Thinking it best to let them pass on, Swithin slackened his pace, and they went ahead of him, apparently without much reluctance. There was no doubt that they had been impressed by the clothes he wore, and having no wish to provoke similar comments from his grandmother and Hannah, Swithin took the precaution on arriving at Welland Bottom to enter the homestead by the outhouse. Here he deposited the cap and coat in secure hiding, afterwards going round to the front and opening the door in the usual way. In the entry he met Hannah, who said, "Only to hear what had been said tonight, Mr. Swithin. The workfolk have dropped in to tell us." In the kitchen were the men who had outstripped him on the road. Their countenances, instead of wearing the usual knotty irregularities, had a smoothed out expression of blank concern. Swithin's entrance was unobtrusive and quiet, as if he had merely come down from his study upstairs, and they only noticed him by enlarging their gaze so as to include him in the audience. "We was in a deep talk at the moment," continued Blore, "and Natty had just brought up that story about old Jeremiah Paddock's crossing the park one night at 1 o'clock in the morning, and seeing Sir Blount a shutting my lady out of doors, and we was saying that it seemed a true return that he should perish in a foreign land, when we happened to look up, and there was Sir Blount a walking along." "Did it overtake you, or did you overtake it?" whispered Hannah sepulchrally. "I don't say it was it," returned Sammy. "God forbid that I should drag in a resurrection word about what perhaps was still a solid manhood, and has to die. But he, or it, closed in upon us as 'twere." "Yes, closed in upon us," said Haymoss. "And I said, 'Good night, stranger,'" added Chapman. "Yes, good night, stranger. That was your words, Natty. I support you in it." "And then he closed in upon us still more." "We closed in upon he, rather," said Chapman. "Well, well, 'tis the same thing in such matters. And the form was Sir Blount's. My nostrils told me, for there I smelled. Yes, I could smell en, been to leeward." "Lord, Lord, what unwholesome scandal this is about a ghost of a respectable gentleman," said Mrs. Martin, who had entered from the sitting room. "Now wait, ma'am. I don't say there was a low smell, mind ye. 'Twere a high smell, a sort of gamey flavour, calling to mind venison and hare, just as you'd expect of a great squire, not like a poor man's anatomy at all. And that was what strengthened my faith that 'twas Sir Blount." "The skins that old coat was made of," ruminated Swithin. "Well, well, I've not held out against the figure of starvation these 25 year, on 9 shilling a week, to be afeard of walking vapour, sweet or savoury," said Hezzy. "So here's home along." "Bide a bit longer and I'm going too," continued Fry. "Well, when I found 'twas Sir Blount, my spet dried up within my mouth, for neither hedge nor bush were for refuge against any foul spring I might have made at us." "'Twas very curious, but we had likewise mentioned his name just afore, in talking of the confirmation that's shortly coming on," said Hezzy. "Is there soon to be a confirmation?" "Yes, in this parish for the first time in Welland Church for 20 years. As I say, I had told him that he was confirmed the same year that I went up to have it done, as I have very good cause to mind. When we went to be examined, the parson said to me, 'Rehearse the articles of thy belief.' Mr. Blount, as he was then, was nighest me, and he whispered, 'Women and wine.' 'Women and wine,' says I to the parson, and for that I was sent back till next confirmation, Sir Blount never owning that he was the rascal." "Confirmation was a sight different at that time," mused Biles. "The bishops didn't lay it on so strong as they do now. Nowadays your bishop gives both hands to every Jack Rag and Tom Straw that drops the knee before him. But 'twas 6 chaps to one blessing when we was boys. The bishop at that time would stretch out his palms and run his fingers over our row of crowns as off-hand as a bank gentleman telling money. The great lord of the church in them days wasn't particular to a soul or two, more or less, and for my part I think living was easier for it." "The new bishop, I hear, is a bachelor man, or a widow gentleman, is it?" asked Mrs. Martin. "Bachelor, I believe, ma'am. Mr. St. Cleeve making so bold, you've never faced him yet, I think?" Mrs. Martin shook her head. "No, 'twas a piece of neglect. I hardly know how it happened," she said. "I am going to this time," said Swithin, and turned the chat to other matters. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23 of Two on a Tower. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tadhg. Two on a Tower by Thomas Hardy. Chapter 23. Swithin could not sleep that night for thinking of his Viviette. Nothing told so significantly of the conduct of her first husband towards the poor lady as the abiding dread of him which was revealed in her by any sudden revival of his image or memory. But for that consideration her almost childlike terror at Swithin's inadvertent disguise would have been ludicrous. He waited anxiously through several following days for an opportunity of seeing her, but none was afforded. Her brother's presence in the house sufficiently accounted for this. At length he ventured to write a note, requesting her to signal him in a way she had done once or twice before, by pulling down a blind in a particular window of the house, one of the few visible from the top of the Ringshill column. This to be done on any evening when she could see him after dinner on the terrace. When he had levelled the glass at that window for 5 successive nights, he beheld the blind in the position suggested. 3 hours later, quite in the dusk, he repaired to the place of appointment. "My brother is away this evening," she explained, "and that's why I can come out. He's only gone for a few hours, nor is he likely to go for longer just yet. He keeps himself a good deal in my company, which has made it unsafe for me to venture near you." "Has he any suspicion?" "None, apparently, but he rather depresses me." "How, Viviette?" Swithin feared from her manner that it was something serious. "I would rather not tell." "But, well, never mind." "Yes, Swithin, I will tell you. There should be no secrets between us. He urges upon me the necessity of marrying, day after day." "For money and position, of course." "Yes, but I take no notice. I let him go on." "Really, this is sad," said the young man. "I must work harder than ever, or you will never be able to own me." "Oh yes, in good time," she cheeringly replied. "I shall be very glad to have you always near me. I felt the gloom of our position keenly when I was obliged to disappear that night, without assuring you it was only I who stood there. Why were you so frightened at those old clothes I borrowed?" "Don't ask, don't ask," she said, burying her face in his shoulder. "I don't want to speak of that. There was something so ghastly and so uncanny in your putting on such garments that I wish you had been more thoughtful and had left them alone." He assured her that he did not stop to consider whose they were. "By the way, they must be sent back," he said. "No, I never wish to see them again. I cannot help feeling that your putting them on was ominous." "Nothing is ominous in serene philosophy," he said, kissing her. "Things are either causes or they are not causes. When can you see me again?" In such wise the hour passed away. The evening was typical of others which followed it at irregular intervals throughout the winter, and during the intenser months of the season frequent falls of snow lengthened, even more than other difficulties had done, the periods of isolation between the pair. Swithin adhered with all the more strictness to the letter of his promise not to intrude into the house, from his sense of her powerlessness to compel him to keep out should he choose to rebel. A student of the greatest forces in nature, he had, like many others of his sort, no personal force to speak of in a social point of view, mainly because he took no interest in human ranks and formulas, and hence he was as docile as a child in her hands wherever matters of that kind were concerned. Her brother wintered at Welland, but whether because his experience of tropic climes had unfitted him for the brumal rigours of Britain, or for some other reason, he seldom showed himself out of doors, and Swithin caught but passing glimpses of him. Now and then Viviette's impulsive affection would overcome her sense of risk, and she would press Swithin to call on her at all costs. This he would by no means do. It was obvious to his more logical mind that the secrecy to which they had bound themselves must be kept in its fullness, or might as well be abandoned altogether. He was now sadly exercised on the subject of his uncle's will. There had as yet been no pressing reasons for a full and candid reply to the solicitor who had communicated with him, owing to the fact that the payments were not to begin till Swithin was 21. But time was going on, and something definite would have to be done soon. To own to his marriage and consequent disqualification for the bequest was easy in itself, but it involved telling at least one man what both Viviette and himself had great reluctance in telling anybody. Moreover, he wished Viviette to know nothing of his loss in making her his wife. All he could think of doing for the present was to write a postponing letter to his uncle's lawyer and wait events. The one comfort of this dreary winter time was his perception of a returning ability to work with the regularity and much of the spirit of earlier days. One bright night in April there was an eclipse of the moon, and Mr. Torkingham, by arrangement, brought to the observatory several labouring men and boys to whom he had promised a sight of the phenomenon through the telescope. The coming confirmation fixed for May was again talked of, and St. Cleeve learnt from the parson that the bishop had arranged to stay the night at the vicarage, and was also to be invited to a grand luncheon at Welland House immediately after the ordinance. This sounded like a going back into life again as regarded the mistress of that house, and St. Cleeve was a little surprised that in his communications with Viviette she had mentioned no such probability. The next day he walked round the mansion, wondering how in its present state any entertainment could be given therein. He found that the shutters had been opened, which had restored an unexpected liveliness to the aspect of the windows. 2 men were putting a chimney pot on one of the chimney stacks, and 2 more were scraping green mould from the front wall. He made no inquiries on that occasion. 3 days later he strolled thitherward again. Now a great cleaning of window panes was going on, Hezzy Biles and Sammy Blore being the operators, for which purpose their services must have been borrowed from the neighbouring farmer. Hezzy dashed water at the glass with a force that threatened to break it in, the broad face of Sammy being discernible inside, smiling at the onset. In addition to these, Anthony Green and another were weeding the gravel walks and putting fresh plants into the flower beds. Neither of these reasonable operations was a great undertaking, singly looked at, but the life Viviette had latterly led, and the mood in which she had hitherto regarded the premises, rendered it somewhat significant. Swithin, however, was rather curious than concerned at the proceedings, and returned to his tower with feelings of interest not entirely confined to the worlds overhead. Lady Constantine may or may not have seen him from the house, but the same evening, which was fine and dry, while he was occupying himself in the observatory with cleaning the eye-pieces of the equatorial, skull cap on head, observing jacket on, and in other ways primed for sweeping, the customary stealthy step on the winding staircase brought her form in due course into the rays of the bull's-eye lantern. The meeting was all the more pleasant to him for being unexpected, and he at once lit up a larger lamp in honour of the occasion. "It's but a hasty visit," she said when, after putting up her mouth to be kissed, she had seated herself in the low chair used for observations, panting a little with the labour of ascent. "But I hope to be able to come more freely soon. My brother is still living on with me. Yes, he is going to stay until the confirmation is over. After the confirmation he will certainly leave. So good is it of you, dear, to please me by agreeing to the ceremony. The bishop, you know, is going to lunch with us. It is a wonder he has promised to come, for he is a man averse to society, and mostly keeps entirely with the clergy on those confirmation tours, or circuits, or whatever they call them. But Mr. Torkingham's house is so very small, and mine is so close at hand, that this arrangement, to relieve him of the fuss of one meal at least, naturally suggested itself, and the bishop has fallen in with it very readily. How are you getting on with your observations? Have you not wanted me dreadfully to write down notes?" "Well, I have been obliged to do without you, whether or no. See here how much I have done." And he showed her a book ruled in columns, headed Object, Right Ascension, Declination, Features, Remarks, and so on. She looked over this and other things, but her mind speedily winged its way back to the confirmation. "It is so new to me," she said, "to have persons coming to the house, that I feel rather anxious. I hope the luncheon will be a success." "You know the bishop?" said Swithin. "I have not seen him for many years. I knew him when I was quite a girl, and he held a little living of Puddle sub Mixen near us. But after that time, and ever since I have lived here, I have seen nothing of him. There has been no confirmation in this village, they say, for 20 years. The other bishop used to make the young men and women go to Warborne. He wouldn't take the trouble to come to such an out-of-the-way parish as ours." This cleaning and preparation that I observe going on must be rather a tax upon you.' 'My brother Louis sees to it, and, what's more, bears the expense.' 'Your brother?' said Swithin with surprise. 'Well, he insisted on doing so,' she replied in a hesitating, despondent tone. 'He has been active in the whole matter, and was the first to suggest the invitation. I should not have thought of it.' 'Well, I will hold aloof till it is all over.' 'Thanks, dearest, for your considerateness. I wish it was not still advisable. But I shall see you on the day, and watch my own philosopher all through the service from the corner of my pew. I hope you are well prepared for the rite, Swithin,' she added, turning tenderly to him. 'It would perhaps be advisable for you to give up this astronomy till the confirmation is over, in order to devote your attention exclusively to that more serious matter.' 'More serious? Well, I will do the best I can. I'm sorry to see that you are less interested in astronomy than you used to be, Viviette.' 'No, it is only that these preparations for the bishop unsettled my mind from study. Now put on your other coat and hat, and come with me a little way.' End of chapter 23.